This is a special American Black Journal Roadshow at the WGPR Historical Museum near downtown Detroit. With me is Karen Hutchin Samuels, who is of the WGPR Museum, Luther Keith of Arise Detroit, and Vicki Thomas of WWJ CBS News. Let's take some questions from our audience.
Hi. Do you believe that, well, I believe that the mainstream media has come away from objectivity, and there's been a loss of integrity in the media as far as I've seen it. They seem to be more about shaping perception. I don't know if that's because I really wasn't paying attention when I was younger, so the consciousness level wasn't there, but to me it seems like that it is really detrimental to the urban community. I want to know if you all see that as a problem too today.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I had the same conversation with myself in trying to figure out, you know, is this person a true journalist? Are they editorial? And I think that's where the problem lies. A true journalist, you should never know what they think. You go on my Facebook page, my Twitter page, you won't know how I feel about one thing or the other, because I take pride in being objective when I cover a story. But you have Fox News and you have others who are quick to tell you their opinions, and I think the lines are blurred. And if I'm confused, I know the average listener viewer has to be confused, because I've been doing this for 30 years, so I know the lines are quite blurred, and that, I think that leads to also the perception of the so-called fake news, because you know, you have people out there interjecting their own personal opinions into a story. So I've definitely noticed that too.
And I would like to support Vicki on that, having taught college level journalism last few years. The #1 problem I have with my students, they all want to put opinion in news stories. It's like it's in their blood. And I go through and I market people, you know, this is opinion, this is opinion, this is where it makes opinion. And I think that, again, Vicki is right in that when you look at MSNBC and see Fox News, where you have 5 people shouting at each other and every instant story comes out, and this whole thing gets skewed, and it's so hard for, I think, the general public to discern what is objective reporting, if there is such a thing, and what is opinion. And I think, again, it's incumbent upon everyone to kind of do their own homework and know when even a turn of a word can be used and change tilt the whole focus of a story. So I do think it does come like you're preaching opinion as opposed to giving people news stories. There's a place, people like Steve, who's written a column, I've written a column. There are people who are paid to write columns and to give opinions, but those are not news stories.
Right.
And again, I think it's incumbent upon to understand that and to be very critical when you listen. Why do they say that word? Why do they use that? I think, again, and then call them up and tell them about it. Hey, that's not right. And I think, again, we're the check on the journalists, if you will. So speak up.
And I think, just to add to that, people have to become more media savvy and understand and consider the source. So we know that their networks and commentators have a particular perspective and point of view. And we're talking a lot about television, broadcast media, but there's also print media. And being able to distinguish between what is opinion and what is fact. And that puts a greater burden on people, but it's really important, because back in the day, there were many fewer outlets. Now there's so many. We did a panel during the summer on media and its influence, and we did a survey, and we asked, where do you get your news? The #1 was Google. It was either Google or Facebook. Right. You know, so it was social media. Yeah. And we were asking them, how did they first hear about the 1967 uprising? And they said, well, it was from radio and from family. So it's a very different landscape, and it makes us much more responsible for what we consume.
Came to that point home. I asked my journalism students, my college level journalism, how many of you read a newspaper a day? Yeah. Not a hand goes up, not one. That is terrifying.
Yeah. Next question.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I'm a broadcast journalism major at Wayne State, so it's funny we're having this conversation. Thank you. I just wanted to know what advice you guys have for aspiring Black journalists, besides not being biased.
My advice, and I was at Wayne State for a period of time, is to be the best doggone journalist you can be. be one kick butt journalist. If you're that, your name is Alexis. They say, well, I don't like the way Alexis dressed. I don't like the way she talked, but damn it, pardon my language, she's the best writer we got. We got to hire her. That's what, you know, work for it to be the best. No one owes you anything. People are not going to like you. And this is what I told students back in the age of affirmative action. Everybody's not in love with, even today, everybody's not in love with diversity. They are not.
Right.
So the best thing you can be is to be doggone good, be the best writer, be the best broadcaster,
Be better than the next.
best producer, and you go far that way.
And the other piece of advice I would give you is to join organizations like NABJ. I actually got my job at WWJ through NABJ, and also Alicia Nails with the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity would tell you internships.
Yes.
Internships.
Yes. Internships. Definitely.
Yeah, I think you also nowadays have to think about lots of different platforms, right? Don't consider yourself a writer and not a producer. Don't consider yourself a radio person and not a TV person. I think trying lots of different things is really smart, and being good at many different things is becoming important as media change and as the landscape really shrinks, the newsrooms shrink in many places.
Good point.
Next question.
Okay, hi, thank you. My name is Anthony Brogdon. I'm a filmmaker here in Detroit. And I guess it's really two questions. One question is, we have maybe, let's say, two main black-owned medias with BET and VH1 and maybe Aspire, but neither one of them have a news program. I know BET just lost theirs with Roland Martin within the last 2 weeks or so. So I wonder, what is your thoughts on the lack of black ownership in media in that regard? And we're losing newspapers and so on, and magazines. A number of our national magazines have now since gone under. And then I guess this is entirely different. What's your thought on journalism compared to commentary? I think that there's some line, and even as a journalist, you can dictate the commentary by the questions that you ask. And I see that happening when you look at the difference between the presidential reporting on, let's say, CNN and Fox. They both call themselves journalists in some respects, but they slant the questions and the commentary is so different. So
And
I know there's two different things, but if you can address that.
Right,
Yeah.
and it almost seems like they're proud of that, you know. But again, like Karen said, you have to consider the source and be media savvy. But if you're taking in news, if you know the opinion of the person speaking, that's not true journalism. That's their opinion. They're interjecting their opinion into whatever that topic might be. In terms of media ownership, the last NABJ diversity census looked at media ownership, and only 8% of commercial radio stations were owned by minorities and only 3% of TV stations. So we've got to make up some ground
The
there.
message there, quite frankly, I think is to look at what we just saw with the people who started this station and all they were up against. And the odds were against them, and they still did it. And I think that, you know, we have to, you know, to get our best, so dig in, find your allies, and get busy and say, we're going to do this. I mean, history tells us that everybody we revere in history overcame something. They said it couldn't be done until somebody did it. And so nothing has changed about that. Get some folks together. We've got black millionaires and billionaires and folks like that who've got jobs. They're smart. Get together. Say we want a station. Get a station, put it together, and use the lesson of Dr. Banks as an example of what can still be done. We are still making history today, people, right now. History is being made. Let's make some more.
Yeah.
And,
Go ahead,
and the last thing I would say was, is the business model for ownership has changed quite a bit. You asked about what's going on with BET and so forth. Okay, those are cable-owned outlets, and they're dependent on distribution from bigger owners. And if they decide, well, BET will no longer be distributed on Comcast or DirecTV and so forth, they're over. That's it. That's different than this station. It was a local station, independently owned, and had a broadcast license. No one could take it off the air. So the nature of ownership, and it gets a little complicated, has changed.
It has.
It's certainly opened up a national audience, which is different than a local audience, but it's a little different. And just as Luther said, there is YouTube. You can get a YouTube channel. You can get a message out there. You have to figure out what is an avenue that is available and how to leverage it and study a little bit.
In many ways, this is the best time ever. At no time in history have people had this type of a platform to disseminate information. And you don't have to be a millionaire to do it. Yeah. Anybody can do it. And so it's just better being strategic about it. Quite frankly, when I work with the Rise Detroit, we're a small organization. We've had tremendous reach because of the fact that our technology is different today. And a lot of people are doing this. So again, be creative and take advantage of this technology that's out here. Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Tawana, and lifelong Detroiter. And my opinion and question is, when we talk about folks not having an opinion in journalism, we're in a city that has suffered, even at the height of 50 years of American Black Journal, a half-century of propaganda assault against Detroit, even as a predominantly black city. And we're just now seeing a more positive narrative around Detroit because white people are moving into the city. I don't think that a black city can afford to not have an opinion when countering the narrative of the demographic. And so I'm interested to know how it's possible to even be neutral in a city that has been so dehumanized. Young people growing up in a city so dehumanized, and now they have a platform to now express themselves. And so as journalists, what advice do you give them then if they're seeing the mainstream media tear down their city to not have an opinion as they create art and media about their city?
Who are you referring to? Who is the
entire populace of the city of Detroit, the 80+%
well, we're not saying
black residents.
That people shouldn't have opinions. I'm just saying, as a journalist, I can cover that story. I would pitch that story when maybe somebody else would not. But I'm not gonna tell the person what to say. I'm not gonna interject my own personal thoughts into it. Now, it gets a little tricky because you can ask questions to get at the type of answer you might be looking for. But, you know, typically you just cover that story. You don't take sides, you know. If it's a human interest story, you know, that it's the side of that person. It's not, or the community. It's not something where I try to present fair and balanced coverage, and any good news director would tell you if so-and-so bashes the mayor, then you give the mayor to an opportunity to respond. So that's what I'm talking about, just presenting fair and balanced coverage without Vicki's opinion being part of the story.
And I think you have to look at, you know, what type of media and format you're looking at. There's a long history of advocacy journalism, particularly for black folks across this nation in our history. So there is a place for advocacy journalism, and some publications pitch themselves. We are an advocacy journalism outlet. There's nothing wrong with that. In a lot of mainstream publications, you have editorials, which are presented as editorials, and you have quote-unquote objective news stories that are written supposedly fair and balanced on both sides. It's very difficult for that, but if you feel strongly that you need to have an opinion to write, then I would say go ahead and pursue that. And there are a lot of avenues to do that. At the same time, I think there is a place for quote-unquote objective journalism outside of commentary and advocacy, and I think we need them both.
Go ahead.
And if you want to influence the coverage that is given this city, you're the audience. And stations depend on advertisers. Yeah. And you can influence, and you could write and say, I'm not really happy with how this particular issue was covered, or these kind of things are being neglected. So a lot of power, we can't underestimate your influence as someone who is watching and buying the products on the news. So being an influencer, and as Vicki said, the journalists work very hard to be objective in covering what they do. But the people who are making decisions on what's going to be news that day, what's going to be the lead story, all journalists know that if it bleeds, it leads acronym all the time. That's a ratings thing. And they're all competing with each other to say, well, we're going to be number one. We're going to push this kind of story or coverage. But they need to hear from the audience. If you're not happy, you think you're not being heard, write the station.
If you think you're not being represented.
And you're not being represented.
And we had an experience when I was at the newspaper in the 90s where a segment of the black community was boycotting the news and the free press. And I had to deal with that. In fact, with the Detroit News at that time, we actually created a new section, some of you may have remembered, called On Detroit.
On Detroit,
for that
yeah.
very reason, to focus on those issues that were not being covered in the mainstream press. And it's funny because now the world has turned, and I will share this with you. We've just been funded for an exciting new project called the Journalism Engagement Fund, with partnership with the Michigan Chronicle, where we're going to cover neighborhoods of Detroit in a very unique and in-depth way, starting the next month, with the idea that we can bring some of that balance and expose some of those things. So the need is still there for all points of view.
Yeah. Last question.
Greetings. My name's Leona, and I have a comment and a couple questions, if you don't mind. Baba Dick Gregory, may rest in power. You know, he used to purchase, I guess, hundreds of papers a day, tens of hundreds of papers a day, and go through them and find out what was left out. And I was glad to see his photo on the wall entering the studio today. Now, I have a question about media literacy. Here's a couple of them, actually. Is it true that, you know, sometimes what's left out is more important than what's actually in the paper, what's in the story? And the other thing is it true that journalism is kind of like the first stage of what's recorded in history or something? What reporters write is kind of like the first draft of what goes down.
Right.
What goes down in history. And media, is that not part of education? I like what Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture said back in the day, and I'm paraphrasing. He talked about how the purpose of education is to help humanity. I guess the last thing I want to say, well, I'm going to try to listen to the upcoming State of the Union tomorrow and try to listen to what's being said and what's not being said.
Well, I think you make a good point. What's not said can be important as what is said. I think one thing, not to be flippant, but if I run the newspaper, it's my television station, it's my radio station, news is whatever I decide to put in it. Every day in newsrooms, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, people sit around on the table and say, what's on the front page? What's our lead story? Right. What are we going to be at the top of the 6 o'clock newscast? And people just like us, most of them are not geniuses, make decisions about what's going to be on the front page. And it's a very subjective thing, which gets back to the whole original point of this, the importance of diversity. So you are right. There's always things that are left out. That's the nature of the beast. But I believe we should keep pushing, advocating, demanding, writing, and expect and demand accountability for those things that aren't there, that you think should be there. Let somebody know and be loud about it.
And there are a lot of different platforms. You know, network news is only 22 minutes to cover the world. The rest is taken up in commercials. So you've got to read you've got to look at different sources, read different newspapers, and become really a greater consumer of news. I mean, that's just the world we live in right now. We can't pack it all in. There's so much happening. It's very difficult to do. So that's one piece of advice. Vicki?
And also, yeah, my reports on the radio are 40 seconds, so I get to say what I want to say to set up what you say in 40 seconds. So you can't put everything in the story. So, yeah, Karen, that is good advice, too. If you want more information on that story, search the web, read a newspaper article on it. We are short and sweet to the point. And other thing, too, in terms of expressing your views when you see something you don't like, it's very important that you do that because radio stations, TV stations have to keep public files. And you're entitled to look at those public files. I mean, if you want to go that far, you can do that. But I definitely encourage you, if you hear something, if you hear too much blood and guts in the first 2 minutes of a newscast and you just have had enough, because I know people that don't even watch the news for that very reason because it becomes our reality, you know. So, yeah. And there's much more going on, you know, than a shooting. So if you get fed up with the type of coverage that you're hearing or seeing, then, you know, pick up the phone and call, send an email, but say something.
Yeah. Okay, Karen Hudson Samuel, Luther Keith, Vicki Thomas, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
So there really is you on Soul Train? They really got video of you on Soul Train?
On the scene.
On the scene, on the
Please,
scene.
please, fill out your surveys. Hand them to Marty back there, the gentleman with his hand raised. If he's got a pen if you need it. It's getting kind of late, but we still would like to try to have a few conversations after the fact if you want to stick around.